My Chemical Romance is by far my favourite band, but I'm too broke to afford any merch, so I decided to take matters into my own hands and draw my own poster. As some of you may know, I really love album covers. I love how they're a visual representation of the songs, the concepts, or the mood of the album itself. So today, I want to show you how I took this album cover and turned it into this, but there's a twist. I want to draw a poster specifically for one song in the album, Our Lady of Sorrows. Sure, I could have just printed out a picture of the album cover, or copied the album cover exactly, but where's the fun in that? I really wanted to make something personal, and something that reflects the song exactly how I interpret it. However, it ended up being a much more complicated process than I thought, so let's get into it. I'm starting by drawing the outline of the figure in the middle of the page. I always start by drawing a kind of stick figure to get the proportions correct, and then I go on from there. Now apparently I wanted to make this drawing as difficult as possible for myself, so I decided to draw the character's hand reaching out in front of them. This is one of the most difficult things for me to draw. I just seem to be completely incapable of doing it. So this is going to be pretty interesting. Luckily, because of the clothes that I'm going to put the character in, it shouldn't be too visible, so I might be okay. As you can see, I've left the bottom half of the figure blank, mainly because I don't like to draw legs, but also because everything's going to be covered by a dress and I don't really want to waste the time figuring that out. Most people will tell you that it's best to always draw the complete figure before going over anything in clothes, but what can I say, I guess I'm a bit of a rule breaker. I'm also trying to sketch out some of the details of the face, but because I'm just in the sketching phase, I won't be adding any more details to that until a bit later on. I want to try and get some of the hardest parts out of the way first, so I'm moving on to refining that hand a bit more. Now I'm sketching in the rest of the figure, and whilst it's still looking pretty clumsy, when I draw in the clothes it should all come together. Now I'm starting to sketch in some more of the veil and the clothes themselves. Remember, the song is called Our Lady of Sorrows, so I'm trying to make this person look like the Lady of Sorrows. This means all the clothes that she's going to wear are going to be really drapey and if they're made out of a heavy material. Once I finish redesigning the veil for the 100th time, I finally land on this design. It's going to tuck into her little belt thing and then fall down along with the dress. Now that the sketch is pretty much finished, I get to start adding in more details, which is my favourite part, especially when I'm adding details to people like I'm doing now. I'm also starting to add more detail to the face. I'm trying to portray a lot of emotion, which is really difficult considering how small the face actually is. I'm trying to make the person look not sad, but desperate and scared. The reason why I want to portray this emotion is because of the meaning and the lyrics in the song. Whilst I'm not going to actually include the real lyrics from the song, because I may get restricted in some way, the general gist is that the person needs to stop being afraid and take their hand and live a better life. That's also why I've drawn the person with their hand outstretched. Now that I've basically finished drawing the pencil outline of the person, I can get started on the background. I've drawn an archway behind her that will soon turn into a stained glass window. Now, normally in my drawings, I don't really add a background in, so this is a pretty new experience for me. As you can see, I quickly got bored of drawing in the background and started working on the person again. I wasn't really happy with how the face looked at this point, so I'm just trying to add in more details and really get it perfect. I'm also adding in the hair a bit differently. I'm changing it to look more like the hairstyle on the love interest on their album cover 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. Whoa, the symbolism never stops for this video. Continuing on with the background, I'm adding in the Lady of Sorrows heart with the 7 swords in it. Because this album isn't really religious, I don't want the symbolism for Our Lady of Sorrows to be super obvious and blatant. But considering the name of the song, there definitely needs to be some symbolism for it. So I'm compromising by just drawing the heart above her head, and that's pretty much it. Except, of course, for the fact that she's standing in a church. I'm also starting to add in some more details for the stained glass behind her. This part was really tricky. So I tend to draw the stained glass window in fits and spurts, not all in one go. I'm also starting to add in some of the pews. Like I said before, I'm not really skilled with drawing backgrounds, and drawing pews is definitely outside of my skill set. Nevertheless, I'm trying as hard as I can to make it look at least somewhat normal. Once I get bored of drawing the background again, I'm further defining the sketch of the dress. The goal here is to make it as easy as possible when I go over everything in pen. I want to know exactly where I need to color in and exactly where I need to leave blank. Drawing pleats in fabric is also outside of my area of expertise, so you'll have to forgive me if these look a little wonky. Because of how prominent vampires are throughout this entire album, I thought it would be cool, and relevant to the song, to add the person holding a wooden stake. I'm finishing off the sketch for the stained glass, and whilst it's not as elaborate as I would have wanted it to be, I still think I did a pretty good job. I'm also drawing in a stone wall. I really wanted this church to seem old and authentic, and apparently I also wanted to make my hand hurt as much as possible. Drawing this part was pretty difficult, not to mention boring. And finally, once I finish adding in some final details in pencil, it's time to trace over everything with pen. This is one of my favorite parts of the whole drawing process. I find it so satisfying. But it's also one of the most nerve-wracking parts of the entire drawing, because from this point on, if I make a mistake, it's permanent. I'm taking my time when drawing this part. I really want to be very careful and make sure I draw exactly the right line, exactly where I want it. A lot of the times, my sketch ends up better than the actual drawing, which can be really frustrating. But I'm determined to not let that happen here. I'm also going over a lot of places with a grey pen, which is less harsh than the black, and it's really good for laying down shadows. I'm adding a little bit of colour to her face now, even though I haven't finished with drawing in the rest of the background. But I quickly realised I should probably finish with outlining the background before I get started on any more colouring. Now, if you thought that sketching in the stone wall would be painful for my hand, it was nothing compared to this. As you can see, I'm not drawing the outline in just one stroke. I'm using many lines to make sure it's as perfect as it possibly can be. It also meant that it was as painful as it possibly can be. My hand was really cramping after this. Once I finish with outlining the stone wall on that part, I'm not finished yet. I then go through and start cross-hatching on the sides of the stones that face away from the window. I'm just trying to lay down some foundations for the shadowing to make it easier when I go over that in the future. Once I finally finish going over all of that for the stones on the right side, I get to move on to the left. I had to turn the page upside down to do the cross-hatching on the other side. For some reason, my hand just wasn't working when it was the right way up. I'm also going over the pews in pen, which was somewhat nerve-wracking, because I knew that after this I wouldn't be able to change anything on them if the proportions or the perspective seemed too weird. I'm doing some cross-hatching again on the sides of the stones to try and deepen the shadow. I'm also going over all of the gaps between the stones with the pen to make the shadows in them seem darker and make the picture seem more 3D. Once I finish going over the stained glass in pen, it's time to add some colour. I'm starting by going over the skirt with some pencil. I'm trying to lay down the base for the colours. I'll be going over everything with markers later to make it look more vibrant. The paper that I'm using here isn't actually made for pencils, it's really better for markers, but I think adding a layer of pencil underneath really helps with the depth of the colour. I'm going in with a lighter orange around the edges of the skirt. I'm trying to make it look like the light from the window is coming out behind her, which means that only the very edges of the person, including her clothes, are illuminated. I'm going for a lighter blue colour for her veil. Now I'm going over all of the darker parts with the markers. Whilst this colour itself isn't too dark, I don't really like to start with the absolute darkest colours. I tend to slowly build up the depth. Whilst this probably means that a lot of my marker's ink goes to waste, this is the method that works best for me, and so I'll stick to it. I'm using a lighter coloured marker to blend the pencil and a bit of the marker ink to make it all look more seamless and smooth. It also makes the colour look a bit richer because it gets rid of the little white spots in between the pencil marks. I'm also adding in the base colour for the glass in the window behind her. You won't be able to see most of this colour in the final product because I want to make the window look like it's night outside, so there isn't going to be much light shining through. But it's just giving me an idea for what colours I should have the stained glass as. I'm also well aware that there are absolutely no stained glass windows that look anything like this, but like I said before, I'm simply too scared to try and attempt anything more complicated. I'm going over the midsection of the skirt with a black pencil to darken it and make it look more like it's in shadows, but to also make the edges that are more illuminated pop out. I'm doing the same thing with her veil and her little belt thing, before going through with a white gel pen to add in some highlights. I'm also going through with a pencil to try and darken her face a bit. Remember all that time I spent on putting the emotion and all the details on her face? Well, that was absolutely wasted, because at the end of this drawing it's so dark and so full of shadows you can't even make out any details. But oh well, it was fun whilst it lasted. At this point in the drawing, I'm basically just adding the tiniest little details everywhere. That means it's pretty boring to watch and very time consuming to draw. I won't force you guys to watch all of it, I'll just skip ahead to another fun part, like adding in some more shadows to the stone wall. If this isn't the definition of fun, then I don't know what is. So I'm just going over everything with a light grey marker, trying to add in the base colour. I'm also choosing some smaller rocks that I think should be more sunken, and going over them with some darker shadows. Once I finish that, I'm going over the edges furthest away from the window with a darker pen, just adding in more and more shadows. I'm also going over the stained glass with a very light grey to make any colour that I may put over it darker and moodier, to really make sure it looks like it's nighttime outside. I'm going over the edges of the stained glass window with a darker grey, and then blending it out with a lighter gradient to really make it look like there's only a really small amount of light coming in. I then go through adding some colour to the leaves and the flowers, making sure that any colour that I may use is really dark, like this dark green and the dark purple that I use for the flowers. I'm now going over each part of the stained glass with a marker that's the same colour as the pencil that I've drawn, just a little bit darker. Then I'm going over the edges of each little segment with a darker grey, so that only the very middle of it has any colour coming through. I'm hoping this effect makes it look like stained glass, but maybe it just looks like random blobs of colour with grey on the outside. Oh well, it was worth a shot. I'm trying to add more depth and shadow to the face, but it's kind of just making it look like it's diseased. So I'll just leave that for now and move on to doing more of the background. I'm slowly adding in more and more shadows to each individual stone in the background. I swear the work for this thing never ends. I also go through with adding some more shadow and depth to the top of the dress, before going back and starting to work more on the face. At this point in the drawing, I was really unhappy with how the face looked. It's blotchy, the lighting doesn't make any sense, and it just looks so weird. But I kept trying and kept adding more and more layers of marker, just hoping that at the end it'll look better. But there's only so much of that I can focus on, so I take a break by adding on more details to the veil. I did some editing off camera, which is why it's suddenly looking so dark, but basically all I did was go over the middle point, so the person and the stained glass behind her, with a grey marker to kind of mute all the colours a little bit. At this point, everything just looks like it's shrouded in shadows, which was exactly the effect that I was going for. It looks really strange now because the background is so light, but this is actually a pretty good stage. If I just add a couple more highlights in the face, I think it may actually all work out. Now I'm blending and softening the highlights on her face, and I think it's looking pretty good. The lighting itself probably doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but it looks somewhat decent, so I'll take it. Now I'm going over the very edges of all of the stones with black, which completely goes over all of the work that I did before, but I really need it to look significantly darker than it already was. I'm doing the same for all of the darker parts of the pews. From this point onwards, I'm just darkening all of the shadows in the stones. I'm using pretty much every grey pen that I own to make a kind of gradient on the stones, so that it's not just one big harsh shadow and then light grey. The shading on the grey gradient on the stones is looking pretty non-existent right now, so I'll go over that with a lighter grey pen to try and smooth it all out. I'm adding in some final colouring to the stained glass, and some final shadowing to the pews. And finally, it's finished. I really like how it turned out. It pretty much came out exactly as I had envisioned it. Except for the pews, I'm still not super happy with those, but I really don't know what else I can do, so I'll just leave them as it is. I really think this captures the mood and the vibe of the song, as well as adding in a lot of symbolism from the lyrics and the meaning. And overall, I'm just really happy with it. This was the biggest challenge that I've ever done with any of my drawings before, But I think I achieved what I wanted to do, which was to create a visual representation of the song. But what do you guys think? Is this a good representation of the song? Could I have done better? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me what album you think I should do next. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.